settlers was John Bidwell. He came to Chico, and he was, the first European settler. And he had a basically form from the government saying that all the city of Chico, all the land in Chico was his. So he got here and he showed it to the Mechoopda people who couldn't speak English, couldn't read English, couldn't write English. And he's like, hey, this piece of paper that you guys don't know, these words mean nothing to you. It says all your land is mine now. So you guys can either stay here and work for me, or you can get out. And a lot of the Mechoopda people, they chose to stay here and work for him, because at this time there was a sentiment that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And a lot of people who had failed at gold mining would turn to bounty hunting natives. And they were cutting the scalps off of native peoples, and they were getting anywhere from $5 to $15 for a native person's scalp. I've heard one of the reasons why natives are called redskins is because they wanted fresh scalps. They wanted them freshly red with native blood. So when Bidwell came here and he said, work for me or leave, they're like, okay, we'll work for you, because he also offered them protection. He had cavalrymen who would come and they would basically patrol the perimeter of his property. There's actually a story of him hiding the Mechoopda peoples down by the creek when some bounty hunters came into Chico. But then we asked the question, was he doing this out of the kindness of his heart to protect the natives, or did he not just want to lose his free labor? And it wasn't technically free labor. He did pay them, but he also owned the only store they could spend their money at. Have any of y'all been to Tres Hombres downtown? Yeah, some of y'all? So that's actually where his general store was. So just a little bit of perspective of how close everything is in Chico. One little known fact that this tour, if y'all have ever taken a tour of Bidwell Mansion, they don't talk about, but Bidwell actually married a native woman before he married Annie Bidwell. So he married Nupani, who was the daughter of the Mechoopda people's chief. So it was like a political thing, he married her and be like, hey, she's my wife now, I'm in charge. And they had children together, which surprises a lot of people, because it is well known that John and Annie didn't have kids, but John and Nupani did. And their descendants still live in Chico today. In fact, just I think 2 years ago, one of them graduated from Chico State with their masters. So he also helped co-found this tour, one of the co-creators of it. So we like to joke that this is rightfully his house. But yeah, so he married a native woman, and then he married Annie Bidwell, and he brought her here from the East Coast. And as you can imagine, when she got here, her and Nupani did not get along. Nupani saw herself as the first wife. She saw that she had seniority over Annie. But Annie disagreed because she was white, and John sided with Annie. So they basically kicked Nupani and their children out of the mansion into a shed in the back. Annie was also in charge of assimilating the natives. So she, forced them to go to school, speak English, practice Christianity, all these different things. And one thing she also did was moving the Mechoopda people who were just in the lawn we just passed. That's where they were staying before Annie got here. So one thing that's very important to the Mechoopda people's culture is Big Chico Creek that runs through campus. Every morning they would wake up, they'd sing, they'd dance, they'd bathe themselves in the water. And Annie didn't like this because, the creek's just right here. She thought it was really annoying, but she was also in charge of assimilating them, so she didn't want them practicing their culture. So she actually moved them to where the Mechoopda, Concow, and Eskin dorm rooms are. So that's a little ironic that Chico State named those dorm rooms after where the Mechoopda were relocated once Annie got here. But by relocating them, they were further from the creek, further from their culture, but also further from Bidwell's protection, because his, cavalrymen would have been stretched in, protecting the mansion, and then over there. So, yeah. Concow is another, local tribe to the area, and Eskin just means soap root in Maidu, so they chose two tribes and just a Maidu word. Just little ironies like that. But if y'all want to go look at another irony, inside the mansion to your left, I believe, there is a white owl facing the door. So this is significant because in a lot of tribes, owls are bad omens. I know in my tribe, any owl is an omen of death. And I know specifically for the Maidu people, white owls are bad omens. So by Bidwell placing it facing the door, it's just sort of like a warning to Native people entering his mansion to like, hey, this is not your place. This is not for you. A little bit more information. In the 1970s, the Mechoopda tribe actually lost their federal recognition. So the government was going around and taking away the federal recognition from a lot of tribes, meaning they were no longer seen as sovereign nations. They had their land taken away. They had their basically just sovereign rights taken away. It took about 20 years of Mechoopda fighting. They went all the way up to the Supreme Court to get their land back. Oh, they didn't even get their land back, just trying to get their recognition back. So one of the only ways they were able to prove that they had been in Chico is there is a cemetery off of West Sac by the train tracks. That's actually where Mechoopda ancestors have been buried for generations. So like, hey, we've been here, we have this land, this is our home. And when they had their recognition taken away, their land was taken from them as well, and it was given to Chico State in the city of Chico. So if y'all look at the houses by the wreck, it looks like they were built in the 70s. That's because they were. That's when their land was taken from them and given to Chico State to develop houses there. But when they got their recognition back, the Supreme Court, they said, well, you can have your recognition back on the promise that you won't try and get your land back. So Mechoopda were like, fine, we won't try and get our land back, we just want our recognition back. And it wasn't until very recently they actually purchased, I think, like 680 something acres of land off of Highway 149. So if y'all are going towards Orville and you see that big tin thing, that's actually where they're working on their casino right now to build in revenues for the tribe. And they actually just recently completed the first roundhouse built in 100 years is also on that property, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So any questions about this stop or in general? Yes.
So where are the 93 acres that got given back?
So the 93 acres that were given back, I don't know if y'all have been, so you know Skyway up towards Paradise, that canyon in there? In there.
There's the kitchen, and here's the stable, and then Chico State.
Native children and some settler children were playing together, and for whatever reason, the settler children got hurt. And this pissed off the white folk real bad. So they brought U.S. cavalry to California, and they basically rounded up a lot of different tribes. It was mostly Maidu peoples and Concow peoples, but we also have had students been like, oh yeah, I'm Pomo and my people were on this walk too. So just anyone in Northern California was getting brought here to Chico for this march. And we stop right here because where the Rose Garden is, there actually used to be a roundhouse here. Rather large roundhouse that would have been used for gatherings and ceremonies and just bringing people together. So this is likely where they would have been brought when they were brought to Chico. And when they were brought here, they were given the option. You can stay here and work for John Bidwell, or you can leave. And the Mechoopda people, they were already here working for Bidwell, so they're like, yeah, we're going to stay. But everyone else was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a servant to this white man. I'm going to go and try and start new. So they were marched 93 miles west to Kovelo, Round Valley Reservation, which is near Fort Bragg. And I believe it was 462 people, Native people left on this march. It took a little over a month. They were not given enough food, so the cavalrymen did not want all of them to make it to Round Valley Reservation. And in fact, only 277 of them made it to Kovelo. They were dying at a rate of 2 to 3 people per day. There are stories of boars that were coming and they were eating the dead and the dying, so people were still alive being eaten by boars. If you were too slow, you were basically executed. The cavalrymen, they were taking babies away from their mothers and then throwing them in the creeks and rivers that they were passing. So the Maidu now have this belief to not go swimming at night because you'll hear the crying of what they call the water babies. Yeah, there's an account of a man who tried to prevent one of the cavalrymen from taking a baby from the mother, and they shot him for it, but the bullet only grazed him, so it knocked him unconscious. He woke up in the middle of the night, you know, shot in the head, didn't know where he was, but he was able to find his way back to Chico following the trail of corpses. So as I had said earlier, at this time, you know, the 1850s to the 1900s basically, there was the sentiment that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And, you know, they were taking their scalps, and it was actually just found a receipt, I believe, from UC Berkeley, that the government paid around like $1.7 million on Native people's scalps. So that's in, you know, 1800s money, so just converting that now, just millions of dollars the government spent to eradicate Native peoples. And one thing that I didn't know, which is crazy until I got to college, but one of the biggest basically payout places for Native scalps was in Marysville. I don't know if all of y'all know where that is, but does anyone know what the Marysville High School mascot is?
The Indians?
Yeah. So that's where, you know, Native scalps were being taken to get paid, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, it'd be a really cool name for this high school. But I bring this up because I actually graduated from Marysville High in 2020. My sister goes there now, and their sports teams still do the woo, 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 war as part of their chant. I know my senior class hoodie, it had just your stereotypical depiction of an Indian. They had like their headdress on, they're making a war face, they're holding a spear. It was crazy. So I bring this up because things like this are still happening today, and it's still a relevant topic. Any questions? So 7 generations, like how is what I'm doing going to affect them, not just how is it going to affect me later?
But why 7? Why not 100? Or, you know, anyway, just like.
So 7 generations, like how is what I'm doing going to affect them, not just how is it going to affect me later?
But why 7? Why not 100? Or, you know, anyway, just like.
How many of y'all have stopped to read the sign here on campus before? All right, awesome. Any of y'all want to volunteer and read it now? Thank you.
I'm gonna butcher some of the pronunciation.
So it's Bahapki.
Bahapki. Bahapki was a Mechoopda village that sat on the banks of Big Chico Creek, right where campus stands today. Bahapki represents a pivotal time in Mechoopda history. At the time the village was inhabited, over 75% of the tribe's population had been lost due to the introduction of novel viruses to its people. The lifestyle they had lived for hundreds of years changed seemingly overnight as they were forced to adapt to new ways in order to survive. Bahapki is a tribute to the sacrifices made by the Mechoopda ancestors and an acknowledgement prayer said here for the people of the tribe in existence today.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is a new addition to campus. It was put up, I think, last semester, I don't know. But it's just to sort of acknowledge and just let people know what land they're on, whose land they're on. So as it says, this whole area, all of Chico, would have been Bohapki. We know this because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a roundhouse where the Rose Garden is. So it is likely just right through here. There would have been a lot of other roundhouses and things like that. And it's just, it's something cool that Chico State is doing. I know on the website they have the land acknowledgement. I know a lot of professors are putting it in their syllabi. So Chico State is trying to do better and acknowledging just whose land we're on, the Mechoopda peoples, and giving them the respect they deserve, and letting them know that, hey, they're still here. One thing this sign brings up is how 75% of their population was lost due to viruses. So whenever anyone talks about natives dying from diseases, they always talk about smallpox. One that's never really talked about, that was the main one that killed native peoples, is actually syphilis. And this is why a lot of native peoples argue that what happened to Native Americans was a genocide. Was because it wasn't just smallpox. They're like, oh, they accidentally got it from my cold, sorry. It's like, no, it's because you were raping and killing our people. That's how we died. We died from STDs. So it was targeted, it was planned, yeah. These sorts of things. Any questions? I'm from Chico State, so Carl and Thelma. A few of our student assistants have actually had the chance to sit down and talk with Thelma. She is 93 years old. We have, in partnership with CCLC, we do dinner with elders. We bring native elders, we just get to talk to them, hear their stories. But yeah, they say Thelma's pretty awesome. She didn't like cars, so she would walk everywhere, and she used to live up in the mountains, so she'd have to walk like 15 miles a day to get to school. And she's like, yeah, that's why I've lived so long, because I walked everywhere. I don't trust cars. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then here you can see a list of all of the Mechoopda alumni from Chico State, starting with Carl and ending most recently with Hila Ramirez, who's actually the person who helped co-create this tour. The one who I mentioned was a descendant of John and Annie. And there's a few, Mechoopda tribal members currently going to Chico State, so within the next 4 years, we'll get a few more additions to the list. In the display, you can see at the top how they look now, and at the bottom how they used to look. And as I mentioned, a lot of these things were made with materials that we find on campus still. So this one is basket redbud. The middle one is a cradle board. That's what they would stick the babies in. You can actually see. And that was made out of valley oak. And then over there you can see flutes. We also have clapper sticks and staves, and those were made out of elderberry. And if you look at the top, you can see those are actually the Maidu dancers who come and dance for the spring renewal. So if y'all come back in the spring to watch this event, you'll likely see those 4 dudes in the picture. And they're wearing what's called flicker band, which is sort of like Maidu people's headdresses. Yeah. Any other